What's up guys, my name's Luke and welcome back to Motion Design. So yeah, it's been 2 weeks and I am back making another tutorial. I saw this really cool render by Drake Smith. He did this really cool kind of like bubbly glass look inside of Houdini, and so that's originally how it started out. Is that I was like, let me see if I can create something like this, and it kind of deviated from there, but at least that was like my original reference over there. So yeah, go support him out. By the way, I got a new monitor. I got one of those like widescreen monitors. So yeah, let me know how it is, because I know that the aspect ratio is going to change from like 16:9 to now 21:9. I think that's what the aspect ratio is. So yeah, let me know if it's a big problem. If it is, I'll figure out a way of how to, when recording the tutorials, to keep it at 16:9. But yeah, if it's not a problem, let me know. I know like Vincent Sweck does his in like 21:9 as well. So yeah, let me know if the new monitor is a problem. But yeah, if it's not, yeah, thank you for all the support and allowing me to, I guess, get a new monitor. So yeah, I really appreciate all you guys. Yeah, before we get into this, if you want access to my project files, they'll be up on my Patreon. And yeah, if you just want to support the channel, you can support me on Patreon. But hey, a like and a subscribe does go a long way. But yeah, let's get into this tutorial. Cool, so let's start out by creating a sphere. So at the moment, if we press NB, you'll see that it has a bunch of polygons, but we have this tight center over here, which does not work very nicely when it comes to simulating. So I find that when using spheres, it's better to change to this isohedron. I think that's how you pronounce it, something like that. Like this, because then now we have equally distributed polygons, which look a lot better. Cool, let's make this like 100. Let's duplicate our sphere. Let's make this like 25, and then I think we can set this like 16. Seeing as though it's smaller, we don't need as many subdivisions. Let's take this sphere, put it into a cloner, and let's go 50, 50, 50, and then just add like that. I think that should be good. Let's just make this a little bit wider over there. And then let's go MoGraph, effectors, and random. I'm just going to add some scale, maybe like 0.5, just so we have some variations in our spheres over here. Just make sure that they're not intersecting. You can either go and manually do it, or we could just go over here, MoGraph, push apart, and just bring this down a bit until we have like this, where none of them are intersecting. But anyways, I mean, with the new simulation engine, as soon as you press play, they kind of move apart already, so it kind of works out, but it's usually good to just make sure that there's no intersections to begin with. Cool, let's press NA to get rid of the lines, and then let's go and make these soft bodies. If we had to press play now, they are all going to fall down. That's because we have gravity in the scene. So let's go to simulation, scenes, and turn off gravity. You know, I don't think I've done a single tutorial where I've actually kept the gravity on. I think even in the other tutorials where I've done something with added gravity in as a simulation force. But yeah, make sure you turn off gravity. Cool, so now if we had to press play, now we have some balls that are floating around, although yeah, you can kind of see that they're floating. I think there's a tiny bit of intersection in the beginning over there. Actually, the reason for that is, I mean, if you look over there, they're not actually intersecting, but the reason for that is because if we had to look in our soft body here, we have a thickness of 1.5 centimeters. So even though our spheres don't look like they're touching, they have a little bit of a border around them of 1.5 centimeters each of them to kind of say where the bounding box of it is. So then those are just kind of like intersecting, and that's why we get that little ripple apart over there at the beginning. Cool, so we want these balls to be attracted to this ball. So let's go simulation forces and a tractor. Let's set this to maybe like 250, and let's press play. Cool, so now these balls come here, but you'll see that we have a slight problem that as they come towards it, they push this ball away. And we don't really want that. We want this ball to still be a soft body, but we want it to actually stay in place. So let's go into our sphere over here, go into mix animation and turn this on. By the way, if you guys hear weird noises in the background, I stay in an apartment and there's a bunch of kids that live here and they are just very loud and very annoying. So yeah, there's weird noises, that's what that is. But yeah, now that we have our mix animation turned on, we should be able to press play now, and these will come and interact with it. It will stay a soft body, but it won't move. So let's go, let's just set this like 300 frames. So you'll see that these are touching, but now they're leaving this gap over here. And this is again because of this thickness. So let's go over here to our surface and change this to something like 0.5. And now press play. And now we get less of that. Cool, so let's mess around a little bit more with these soft bodies, because this big sphere over here doesn't look like a soft body. It kind of just feels like it's like a lighter object, and we want it to kind of push in a little bit. So let's go here, and let's set this to about like 1,000. So I'm not gonna lie, I don't really fully understand soft bodies just yet. A lot of this is just kind of trial and error, messing around with sliders. I definitely think there are better tutorials out there who will teach you how to do like soft bodies properly. But for what we're trying to do here today, you don't really need to know much. We're just trying to make it a little bit softer than what it is. I think let's just bring this up a bit. And now let's see what this looks like. Cool, we're getting it to be a little bit more squishier now. So we don't want it to be too squishy. I mean, looking at the reference and like looking at bubbles, they don't really push each other in too much. I mean, the main thing is that they actually kind of join. So I wasn't actually able to achieve that. I actually don't know how we could do that in a Cinema 4D, to be honest. See, it's the way the bubbles kind of form like that. But yeah, I kind of varied away from the original reference and kind of just ended up making kind of a glass type of reflective render, which I thought still looked cool. And yeah, hopefully you guys still think it looks cool. But yeah, it's definitely a little more of a basic tutorial. Let's see. Cool. They have a little bit more bounce to it. I think if we turn this up, it makes it a little bit more stiff. Let's bring down our density by a bit. Yeah, I think that's a little bit better from what we're looking for. So that they're like fully squish and gives us this nice like little bit of deformation. Let's go into our cloner over here and do the exact same thing. Let's give this like 1,000, and let's bring down our density over here. Now these are a lot more squishy, so they don't really give that full-on bubble effect where they actually kind of join together, but because of the way that they're squishing, it kind of gives that effect. But yeah, definitely not the proper way to do full-on bubbles. But for what we're trying to do, this is kind of perfect. Cool, so at the moment, this looks fine, but this doesn't really look like bubbles. I mean, we want everything to be connected together. So we can do that with a volume builder and a volume mesher. Let's put our builder inside of the mesher, put our sphere inside of the builder, and put our cloner inside over here. Now you can see that connected, but that doesn't look very nice. But we can solve that just by adding an SDF smooth. And look at that, we got this kind of like bubble look going on, which looks really cool. And so now if we had to go back to beginning and press play, it'll be a little bit slower since that it needs to calculate the voxels. But now we get this really cool kind of like bubble liquidy effect, which is exactly what I was going for. Super easy and super yeah, super cool, super easy to achieve. Yeah, doesn't that just look really cool? I don't know, I thought the two results was very cool. But yeah, very simple. So for my render, I don't want them to start moving in the beginning. I don't want it to feel like a simulation where it's like, oh yeah, there's balls here and there's ball here. I want it to be in the middle of it. So usually how you would do that is that you would go over here to the dresser and say set initial state, but you'll see that it's grayed out. We can fix that by making this editable. You'll see again that if we go here, it's still grayed out. We just need to make these editable. And now when we press play, we can find a point that we like, something like that, where they're already all in motion. Let's select all of these and then go set initial state. Might also be good to make the sphere set initial state of the sphere over there, so that we don't have that little bounce there in the beginning. Cool. And now look, that's how they start out. So yeah, you obviously don't need to do this, but just in case you're wondering why the set initial state was grayed out, that's kind of how you do it. So we can just add one other little thing before we move on to the texturing, which is just to add a tiny bit of turbulence, just so that these bubbles kind of move around it. So I'm just going to add just a bit of turbulence, just so that when they're on here, they kind of move around a bit. Let's just make it a tiny bit more pleasing to the eye by just making one more of these. Let's just bring it this side over here. So when we press play, now we got one on the side and a bunch over there. Cool. And then now when we turn on our volume builder and measure, they are connected and we got this little blob of bubbles over here. Cool. So now let's go and set our textures. So I've got a little startup over here where I have just my render view and a bunch of like presets that I like using. Let's go to lights and let's add a dome light over here. I think when you're doing anything with any sort of reflections, I think it's good to set up the lighting beforehand. So let's go with our dome light and add a graph over here. That's going to create a texture that's going to be used as our dome light. Let's go into our dome light's texture. We're going to look for a C4D shader. Let's plug this into our map over here. Let's just make it a bit bigger. And let's add a gradient. Cool, so the gradient that I'm going to use today is going to be a circular gradient. I'm going to bring this quite far down like this, and I'm going to make a duplicate of this, and I'm going to make this kind of like a pinky purple kind of look, something like that. I think that is quite nice. Cool, let's just frame this up a little bit, and if we had to just add a basic material onto our volume builder over here and just turn the transmission all the way up, you'll see that now we have a pretty cool little render over here. We get a bunch of very nice reflections thanks to the HDRI that is doing like most. Cool, so I want to show you two different ways of texturing it. The first way is just going to be a really basic way of how to texture it, where it's just like if you just kind of wanted a bubble look that's a little bit different. And then the second way is going to be a little bit more advanced, going in and creating our own kind of like procedural type textures. Cool, so with this texture over here, let's go and let's bump up our IRR or bring it down a bit. I think maybe down a bit, something like that. Let's go add a little bit of thin film over here. Let's just bring the thickness by a tiny bit. And then let's raise or bring down, which one? Something like that. Now we got this little border inside of it, which I thought looked quite nice. So that's pretty basic at the moment. We can go in now, and if we didn't like all these separate reflections inside of here, we could turn down our trace depth and get a little bit more of a simplistic look. Same with our transmission over here. And then we could get something, I mean, that already looks pretty cool, but definitely not what I'm going for. But yeah, here's the one way of doing it, which is a pretty easy and a pretty simple way of doing it. So the other way that I wanted to go about doing it was to have like a bunch of like mini circles on it. So there's two ways you could go about that. The one way is to like use X particles or an emitter or a cloner and just clone a bunch of spheres around it. But that's going to be extra processing power, and we could have achieved that similar result just by using textures. So you can either go and download a texture. I ended up making my own texture over here. Let me show you. So this is the texture that I made over here. I'm going to show you how I made it, and you can either download a texture like this, or you can follow along with how I'm going to do it. Oh, that is not similar 40. Cool, so I used X particles actually to get that texture. Let's go here into X particles. This part obviously is not necessary. This is only if you just want to do it, you know, by yourself. So if you're not interested, you can skip ahead a little bit. But if you are interested, then yeah, stick around. This will probably take like a minute or two. Cool, we'll turn off our speed over here. And if we have to press play, we'll get a bunch of spheres appearing. Let's go into our display over here and set this to circles. But we want it to be equally distributed by the size of each circle. And we can do that pretty easily with a XP circle packer, which literally does that. So if we have to press play now, nothing will happen. That's because we need to put our emitter into this emitter shape over here. And now when you press play, look at that, we get a bunch of different spheres appearing. So you can adjust this just by changing the max radius and the min radius over here. We can also get a little bit more detail by having a little bit more particles. Cool. So now we have a bunch of kind of droplets. So what I did was I then added a render tag onto this, changed it to custom objects, change it, put a disk over here, change this to something like 5, put the disk in here. Maybe 5 is a little bit too big. Maybe 1, yeah, something like 1. And then what I did is all I did was I just rendered this out on a black background. Cool. Then we're going to open up Photoshop. Yes, I have the old version of Photoshop. I just never use Photoshop, so there's no point in me buying it, to be honest, at the moment. So yeah, I just got the really old version. Cool. And let me go and grab it. So here is what it came out as. Okay, it didn't come out like this. It seems like I overrode over it. What I did was I went to go File, Blur, and then I added a Gaussian blur over here just to make it a little bit blurrier. Cool, so then we want this texture to be a little bit seamless. So let's go Filter, Other, Offset, and let's just offset this by a bit until we can see our seams clearly. You can see that we have this one seam going down here. Let's find our horizontal seam over there. Cool, so now we can see what we need to do is we need to go with our stamp tool. We're going to select a point and then we're just going to go and cover up more to show you guys what to do. The other thing that I did with this is that everything is very equally distributed. I just went in here and just manually chose like smaller parts and then got rid of a bunch of the bigger spheres so that at the end result I had something like this where there's big areas of small dots and big dots over there. Cool. So how are we going to use this to texture our balls over here? Let's go and create a new texture. Let's put this in here. Let's go and let's add a max on noise. Let's throw this into the roughness. Let's just, while we're here, turn up the transmission. We can turn off the base weight over there. It's just a little bit small at the moment. We want this to be a little bit bigger. So let's make it like 5. Something like that is good. And now you see that we have these very rough spheres. So let's go and search for a change range, something like this, just so that we have, they're still rough, but they're really not as rough. It's more just like a subtle bit of roughness, which is what we want. Let's switch for texture, and let's grab the texture that we made or that you downloaded, depending on if you followed along or not. And now what we're going to do is we're going to search another one of these change range, put this in here. Let's put this into our input and this into our min over here, and then plug that into the roughness. And now you can see that we kind of have these balls over here. So we don't have a good UV wrap for this, so I'm just going to change this to cubic for now, just so that it's like equally distributed along this. And then let's go back into here and let's go and change this up a bit. So change range over here. I think something like that, where it's rough, but it's not too rough. Let's duplicate this again, and let's plug this into our IOR. So flexion IOR. Let's set this to 1.5 and 1.33. Yeah, I think that is good. You could go higher over here and get a bit of a different results depending on the look that you're going for. But I think this 1.33 works nicely for what we're trying to do. Cool. Let's go and add a bump map. So in Photoshop over here, you could now go Filter, 3D, and you can get a bump map over here. But yeah, you can either do it that way, but I'm just going to use this texture over here. So at the moment, this texture looks fine, but I want to add a bit more detail to it. So let's go and search for a mix. Put our mix into both of these inputs. Let's take this texture, duplicate it. And so now we have one texture that is big. And let's go with our other texture over here and let's make it small. So let's make it like 5 by 5. Let's just rotate it a little bit so that we get a little bit of a weirder result. Cool. Let's search for max on noise. We'll use the noise to blend between the two of them. So let's go over here, something like maybe like 500. And let's just clamp this a little bit. Cool. So now you'll see that we have areas of smaller detail and then we got areas of bigger detail. You could go in over here and change this to different noises to see which one suits what you're trying to do better. But I think like this works for now. Cool. Let's try and put this into our bump and put that into our bump over there. So we get a little bit of bump, which looks nice. Soften this a bit. Isn't this? Yeah, maybe something like that works. Then let's go and search for a displacement. Let's plug this into our texture map over here and plug this into our displacement. Let's also just add a scalar range. That's input, alt input, and let's put this in here. And let's just bring this down by a bit so that it's not too hectic. And then we only want it to displace by a bit, so let's say it's like something like, I don't know, 0.23 works. Then on our volume builder, let's go into our RS object tab, turn on tessellation and turn on displacement. So you'll see we'll get a tiny bit of displacement. We want a lot more. Set this and with a scale of 30. Cool, and now you'll see that we have these big bumps in maybe if we do this the other way around, will that give us a better result? And now we get a bunch of nice bumps on it. So I'm just going to press play for a bit just to get to a point where there's a little bit more interactions going on. Let's turn back on our volume builder and meshing. And now let's go and find a nice angle. So I'm going to change this to maybe around like 80. Let's move. I think something like that should work for now. So we can just do a tiny bit of post over here. We could just go into our color corrections, bump up our contrast by a bit. Let's double click, let's boost this, and let's bring down our docks. Cool. And now, very easily, we have this nice, kind of wet looking water droplet. So I spent a little bit more time on my texture over there. It will be up on Patreon for you guys. But yeah, this is pretty much the basics of how I went about achieving it. So yeah, I really hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, please consider leaving a like and a subscribe. And again, if you're interested in the project files, they'll be up on Patreon. But yeah, until next week, peace.